Rafael leaned against the cold concrete wall of the São Paulo bus station, his backpack his only companion. Once, he'd had a promising life, a good job, and dreams for the future. But in just a few months, everything had changed. Life on the streets was brutal, but it taught him resilience. And now, with nowhere else to turn, he received an unexpected message from a friend he hadn't seen in years. This friend was living in South Korea and offered Rafael a chance to work as a janitor in a small factory. It wasn't much, but it was a way out. Despite not knowing the language, the customs, or even the type of work, Rafael felt he had to try. This is it, he thought. It's a new start. Arriving in Seoul, Rafael was hit by a wave of uncertainty. The bustling streets, filled with lights and hurried crowds, made him feel small and out of place. The factory job was exhausting, cleaning floors for hours each night, working alongside strangers he couldn't communicate with. Yet, he was grateful to have a roof over his head and enough money to afford a simple meal. He knew he had to survive. One night, as he was mopping the floor, he noticed a woman working late in one of the offices. She looked over at him and waved. "You're the new guy, right?" she asked in slow English, her words careful but kind. Her name was Minji, a senior engineer, and she had stayed late to finish a project. She offered him some leftover dinner, and for the first time since his arrival, Rafael felt noticed. This small act of kindness gave him the encouragement he needed to push forward. Before we dive deeper into this amazing story, let us know where in Brazil you're watching from, and if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? We'd love to hear your dreams. As days turned into weeks, Rafael's routine settled into place. Long shifts at the factory, nights studying Korean with free apps, and brief moments of connection with Minji, who seemed fascinated by his story. She didn't see him as just the janitor. She saw potential in his tenacity, his drive to improve, and his curiosity about the unfamiliar world he found himself in. Soon, Minji began giving him small tasks, teaching him simple mechanics and showing him how different machines worked. Rafael was a quick learner, and her guidance was invaluable. He felt a spark of hope, a feeling that maybe he could do more than just clean. Little did he know, these simple lessons would change everything. But one night, just as he was gaining confidence, he received devastating news. The factory was struggling financially and planning layoffs. The low-level employees would be the first to go. Rafael was shocked. He had finally started to feel like he was building a new life, and now it was slipping away again. The reality of facing unemployment in a foreign country where he had no safety net was terrifying. For the first time since he'd arrived, he wondered if he should have stayed in Brazil, even if it meant going back to nothing. Desperate, he started searching for any work he could find. One morning, while applying for jobs, he crossed paths with Mr. Lee, a charismatic entrepreneur who ran a small tech startup. Mr. Lee was looking for hands-on, dedicated workers, and Rafael's unique background and story caught his attention. After hearing about Rafael's struggles and his eagerness to work, Mr. Lee decided to give him a chance, starting as an assistant in his company. This opportunity felt like a miracle. As Rafael began his journey with Mr. Lee's startup, he learned quickly. Although he still struggled with the language and culture, he was determined to make an impact. Mr. Lee, seeing Rafael's persistence and honesty, became a mentor, guiding him not only in work, but also in understanding Korean business culture. Rafael finally felt like he was building something, and he wanted nothing more than to succeed, not just for himself, but to prove that he could rise above the life he had left behind. But as his responsibilities grew, so did the pressure. Would he be able to hold on to this opportunity? Or would he once again find himself facing the darkness of failure? Rafael's life was far from easy, but the glimmer of hope he felt every time he stepped into Mr. Lee's startup kept him going. He had come a long way since that first night cleaning floors, but he knew he still had much to prove. His mornings were dedicated to studying Korean and learning about electronics, while his afternoons were spent at the office assisting with any task he could get his hands on. Rafael threw himself into his work, eager to learn, pushing his limits, and hoping that his efforts would lead to something greater. Days passed, then weeks, and Rafael became known around the office as the go-to guy for any task. He fixed broken equipment, ran errands, and even organized files, gaining a reputation for his quick thinking and reliability. Mr. Lee noticed Rafael's growth and began to trust him with more significant tasks. Although Rafael was grateful for the trust, he also felt the weight of expectations grow. He wasn't just a helper anymore. He was becoming a part of the company, and it meant everything to him. But working in a startup wasn't easy. Every decision felt like it could make or break the company. One afternoon, Mr. Lee called Rafael into his office with a serious look on his face. "Rafael, we're running low on funds. The next project has to be successful or we won't make it through the year," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Mr. Lee had invested everything into a new line of electronic devices, and he was counting on Rafael to help with production. Rafael felt a knot form in his stomach, but he nodded, determined to rise to the challenge. He spent late nights at the office, often working alone after everyone else had gone home. He reminded himself that this was his chance to prove himself, not just to Mr. Lee, but to everyone who doubted him. During one of these late nights, Minji stopped by. She had been following his progress and was amazed at how far he'd come. She brought him a coffee and sat down next to him, looking at the messy plans spread out over his desk. "Rafael, I knew you were determined, but this is impressive," she said, genuinely surprised. "You're practically running this project on your own." Rafael managed a small smile. "It's a lot of pressure," he admitted, "but I don't have any other option." He glanced at her, appreciating her presence. In this foreign country, Minji was the only person who truly knew his story, and her faith in him was one of the things that kept him going. However, things took a sudden turn the following week. Mr. Lee announced that a large investor would be visiting the company to evaluate their progress. If the investor was impressed, they'd secure the funding needed to expand. But if not, Mr. Lee's expression was tense as he explained this to the team. Rafael understood immediately. This was their chance to keep the company alive, or it could be the end of everything he had worked for. As the visit approached, Rafael barely slept. He double-checked every prototype, ensured that every file was in order, and rehearsed what he would say if asked about the project. His mind raced with thoughts of his past, of the hardships he had faced on the streets in Brazil, and the journey that had brought him here. This meeting felt like the final test. On the day of the investor's visit, Rafael arrived early. He watched the investor closely as Mr. Lee led him around the office, explaining the project. The investor, a reserved and meticulous man named Mr. Han, listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When they reached Rafael's workstation, Mr. Lee introduced him. "This is Rafael. He's been instrumental in our recent developments," he said, placing a hand on Rafael's shoulder. Mr. Han looked Rafael up and down, a slight frown crossing his face. "An instrumental worker? With no formal background in engineering?" Mr. Han questioned, skeptical. Rafael felt his confidence waver, but he held his ground, meeting Mr. Han's gaze. "Yes, sir," Rafael said, steadying his voice. "I don't have a degree, but I've learned on the job, and I believe I can bring something unique to the team. I understand the challenges and what it means to fight for a future." Mr. Han raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by Rafael's straightforwardness. For a moment, it seemed he might dismiss Rafael's contribution. But then, Mr. Han asked a question about the production process, something technical that Rafael had studied intensely. Rafael launched into an explanation, detailing the modifications he'd made to improve efficiency and lower costs. As he spoke, Mr. Han's expression shifted, his interest visibly growing. He nodded slowly, seeming to reevaluate Rafael's role in the company. When Rafael finished, Mr. Han was silent for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Impressive," he said, his voice flat but approving. The visit ended with Mr. Han leaving the office quietly, leaving the team unsure of his decision. The next few days were tense. Every time Rafael saw Mr. Lee, he searched his face for any sign of news, good or bad. On the third day, Mr. Lee finally gathered the team together. Rafael's heart pounded as he waited, hoping desperately that his work had made a difference. Mr. Lee smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "We got the investment," he announced, and the entire office burst into applause and cheers. Rafael felt a rush of emotions, joy, relief, and pride. He had faced skepticism and his abilities had been questioned, but he had proven himself. As the months passed, Rafael continued to climb within the company, his responsibilities growing. Mr. Lee relied on him not only as a worker, but as a trusted partner. Rafael's work ethic and unique perspective, shaped by his difficult journey, became invaluable to the company's operations. His ideas led to cost-saving measures and improvements in efficiency that helped secure even more investments. However, as Rafael's career flourished, so did his inner struggles. Despite his achievements, he felt the weight of his past in Brazil. Memories of the nights spent on São Paulo's streets haunted him, and he feared the fragility of his newfound success. He often asked himself if he truly deserved it. Could someone with his past ever find peace with a life he'd never imagined? These questions continued to surface, even as he grew into a leadership role at the company. Minji noticed his internal conflict, his lingering self-doubt. One evening, as they walked home after a long work day, she stopped him. "Rafael, you've come so far," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "But you're still holding on to who you were. You're not that person anymore. You're here now, and you deserve this." Her words struck a chord with him, and he realized she was right. But Rafael's journey was far from over. Just as he started to embrace his success, Mr. Lee called him into the office with surprising news. The startup was planning to expand overseas, into Brazil, and Mr. Lee wanted Rafael to lead the new branch, an opportunity that would bring him full circle back to his homeland, but with an entirely new purpose. Rafael was stunned. Could he really go back to Brazil, this time as a business leader rather than someone searching for survival? His heart raced as he considered the possibilities, wondering what awaited him if he returned home. The idea was thrilling and terrifying. Rafael sat alone in the quiet of his small apartment, staring at the email Mr. Lee had sent him, outlining the plans for expanding the company to Brazil. It felt surreal. He had come to South Korea with nothing, and now he was being asked to return home as a leader. Could he really manage a whole branch of the company? Could he face Brazil again, but this time as someone others would look up to? The fear of failing, of letting down the very people who had trusted him, was paralyzing. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Minji, as usual, with her calm but curious smile. She sensed his worry immediately. "Rafael, you've worked hard for this moment. What's holding you back?" "It's just going back to Brazil," he said, his voice uncertain. "I left with nothing. And now, to return like this, I feel like I'm stepping into someone else's life. What if I'm not cut out for this?" Minji shook her head, her expression serious. "Rafael, you've already proven you're capable, but you have to believe it yourself. This is your moment." Her words echoed in his mind as he lay in bed that night. The next morning, he found himself standing before Mr. Lee, giving him an answer he hadn't even fully processed yet. "Yes, I'll do it," he said, surprising even himself. Mr. Lee's face broke into a wide smile. "Excellent. This will be challenging, Rafael, but I believe you're ready." With the decision made, Rafael's days turned into a whirlwind of preparation. He spent long hours reviewing the expansion plans, coordinating with the main office, and learning the finer details of managing a team. His nerves simmered under the surface, but his determination carried him forward. This was his chance to change the narrative of his life, to go from a homeless man on the streets of São Paulo to a respected leader. He just hoped he could live up to the expectations everyone had placed on him. A week before the launch, Rafael's team in South Korea gathered to bid him farewell. They congratulated him, clapping and cheering, but Rafael's heart was heavy with the weight of his new role. Minji approached him last, holding out a small, neatly wrapped package. "For good luck," she said with a warm smile. Inside was a notebook with the words "New Beginnings" written on the cover. Remember, this is your story, Rafael. Write it the way you want. Rafael's flight to Brazil was filled with anxiety and flashes of memories from his past. He thought of the narrow alleyways, the cold nights, the hunger he once felt. He worried about what people would think of him, especially those who had known him in his lowest moments. But when he landed in São Paulo, something inside him steadied. This wasn't a retreat. It was a return, and this time he would face it with strength.
Ei, recadinho rápido. Se inscreva no canal para não perder as próximas histórias com legenda dupla. E claro, deixa o seu like.
The day finally arrived for the new branch's grand opening, and Rafael had meticulously planned every detail. His Korean colleagues had flown in, eager to support the event. Investors, industry leaders, and even some familiar faces from his past showed up, all curious to see this new Rafael. As he took the stage to make his opening speech, his hands trembled slightly, but he kept his voice steady. He shared his story openly, how he had once been homeless, how South Korea had given him a chance, and how he wanted to use this opportunity to bring hope to others in Brazil. The audience was silent, captivated by his journey. Some looked at him with admiration, others with disbelief, but Rafael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The applause was thunderous, and as he stepped off the stage, Mr. Lee clapped him on the back, beaming with pride. However, the event wasn't over. A man approached him from the crowd, his face familiar but older, worn by time. Rafael's breath caught. It was Jonas, a friend he had known from his hardest days in São Paulo. Jonas had been a fellow wanderer, another soul struggling to survive. They had lost touch when Rafael had left Brazil, but the recognition was instant. "Rafael? Is that really you?" Jonas asked, disbelief in his eyes. "Yes, Jonas. It's me," Rafael replied, his voice thick with emotion. The two embraced, each remembering the difficult days they had shared. Jonas told Rafael how he had heard rumors of his success in South Korea, but had never believed them. "You left, and I thought I'd never see you again. But look at you now." As the evening wore on, Rafael learned that Jonas too was trying to rebuild his life, but he hadn't found the same opportunities. In that moment, Rafael realized what his success truly meant. He wasn't just there for himself. He was there to create opportunities for others, people like Jonas, who were struggling but still fighting for a chance. The next day, Rafael went back to his office with a new purpose. He reached out to his team, discussing ideas for a training program that could offer jobs to underprivileged Brazilians who had the drive but lacked the resources. He pitched the program to Mr. Lee, who immediately saw its potential and encouraged him to pursue it. Rafael's mission was clear. This branch wouldn't just be about business success. It would be about community, about giving people a new start. But just as things were beginning to settle, Rafael received a disturbing call from South Korea. The main office was facing an unexpected financial crisis due to a large contract falling through. Mr. Lee explained that the company was struggling to stay afloat and that without immediate action, they would have to shut down several branches, including the new one in Brazil. Rafael felt a cold wave of dread. This was everything he had worked for, and now it was slipping through his fingers. He knew he had to act, and fast. With no time to lose, he sprang into action, reaching out to his new connections in São Paulo and asking for emergency meetings. He prepared pitches, highlighting the company's mission to support local communities and the training program they were developing. He needed investors who saw the vision beyond just profits. The next few days were a blur of back-to-back meetings, phone calls, and countless rejections. Each no cut deeper, and Rafael felt his determination start to waver. Doubts clawed at him. Maybe I was never meant to be here. Maybe this was all just a lucky break, he thought, the fear of failure looming large. But just when things seemed hopeless, he received a call from a local entrepreneur he had met during the branch's opening. The man had been deeply moved by Rafael's story and saw the potential for the company's mission in Brazil. After a brief discussion, he agreed to invest enough to keep the branch running and pledged further support if Rafael's programs showed results. The relief was overwhelming. With the investment secured, Rafael informed Mr. Lee, who was both grateful and impressed by Rafael's quick action. The main office stabilized and the crisis passed, but Rafael knew he had been changed forever by the experience. He wasn't just a survivor or a hard worker, he was a leader. He had saved not only the branch, but also his vision for the future. Standing outside the office that evening, Rafael looked out over São Paulo, feeling the weight of everything he'd overcome. This city had once been a place of pain and hardship, but now it was his foundation, the place where he would continue to grow and create opportunities for others. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was running from his past. He was standing firmly in his present, ready to build a future for himself and for countless others. The office was alive with energy. Rafael's training program had not only kept the branch afloat during tough times, but was now thriving, drawing interest from both local businesses and international partners. Every morning, he welcomed new trainees, men and women who, like him, had faced hardship but were determined to rebuild their lives. Some were former janitors, others had backgrounds in areas as diverse as food service and construction, yet all of them carried a fierce determination in their eyes. Rafael saw himself in each of them, remembering his own journey from the streets of São Paulo to his role as a leader in this company. One morning, as he walked through the training room, he spotted Jonas among the new trainees. Jonas looked up, smiling but with a hint of disbelief. "Rafael, I never thought I'd end up here, working with you," he said, shaking his head in amazement. Rafael smiled, patting his old friend on the back. "It's a new start for both of us, Jonas. This is just the beginning." As the program expanded, Rafael's reputation began to grow within the community. People called him the man who came back, the one who hadn't just left Brazil to make a better life for himself, but had returned to uplift others. The local media even picked up his story, and Rafael was soon approached to speak at community centers and events, where he shared his journey from homelessness to CEO. At first he felt strange speaking publicly about his past, but he soon realized the impact his story had. Each time he spoke, people approached him afterward, inspired to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles. Yet, success wasn't without challenges. Managing the new branch, overseeing the training program, and keeping up with his expanding role left Rafael exhausted. Late one night, he found himself alone in his office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and unfinished tasks. As he rested his head on the desk, a pang of doubt crept back into his mind. The weight of responsibility was immense, and he questioned if he was still that same man from São Paulo, trying to do more than he could handle. But then he remembered Minji's gift, the notebook with "New Beginnings" printed on the cover. He reached for it, flipping through the empty pages until he reached the first one, where he had written a single line months ago in Korea. "You're here, Rafael. Believe in it." He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. Minji's words reminded him of why he had started this journey, to build something lasting not only for himself, but for others who needed hope. With renewed focus, he picked up his pen and began listing his priorities, determined to keep pushing forward. A few months later, Minji visited São Paulo to see Rafael's progress for herself. They spent the afternoon touring the facilities, and Rafael proudly introduced her to his trainees. As she met them, she noticed how they looked at him, not just as a boss, but as a mentor and guide. Seeing this, she pulled him aside. "Rafael, do you realize what you've done here?" she asked, her voice full of pride. "You've turned your struggle into strength, and now it's helping others." Rafael smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I wanted to give them the chance I was given. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, to feel like you're nothing. No one deserves to feel that way." As his program expanded, Rafael's story spread, drawing in support from international partners interested in replicating his model in other countries. Mr. Lee was thrilled by Rafael's success, proposing a new project to create training centers in communities facing high unemployment, inspired by Rafael's vision. Rafael accepted the offer, seeing it as a way to continue what he'd started. But the most significant change came one evening when Rafael received a message from a stranger. It was a young man from Brazil who had been following Rafael's story online. The message read, "I'm struggling to keep going, but your journey gives me hope. If you could rise from nothing, maybe I can too. Thank you." Reading those words, Rafael felt a surge of emotions. His story, once filled with hardship, had now become a beacon of hope for others. All the painful memories, the struggles, the long nights of doubt, it had all led to this moment. His journey was no longer just his own. It was a story that belonged to everyone who had ever felt beaten down by life, everyone who believed they had no future. And now he was living proof that, no matter how dark things became, change was always possible. Over time, Rafael's life took on a new rhythm. He continued managing the branch, expanding his program, and speaking at events. He had built a new life in Brazil that was unrecognizable from the one he'd left behind years ago. Yet he never forgot his roots or the people who had helped him along the way. Mr. Lee, who took a chance on him, Minji, who believed in him, and Jonas, who had stood by him even in their lowest moments. Years passed, and Rafael's legacy grew. The training program spread to multiple countries, helping thousands of people who, like him, had once believed they had no future. Each time he visited one of the centers, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey, which began with a single desperate flight to South Korea, had transformed not only his life, but the lives of countless others. Standing at one of the new training centers years later, Rafael looked around, filled with pride. His story had come full circle, and the man who had once struggled to survive was now a leader, a mentor, and an inspiration to many. He realized then that the journey wasn't just about where he came from or where he had ended up. It was about how he had used his experiences to create something meaningful for others. As he left the center that day, Rafael felt a deep peace within himself, knowing that he had finally found his place in the world. His journey had been long and full of challenges, but every step had brought him to this moment, a life he had once thought impossible, and he knew, without a doubt, that he had earned every bit of it. If Rafael's incredible story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this video with friends who might need a little extra hope today. And if you're ready for more inspiring journeys, click on the video appearing now. You won't want to miss what's next.